Hi, welcome back. Working on Project Civic again here. Last video we did the valve cover gasket and just found out it does have a power steering leak underneath coming from the rack. It looks like one of the seals inside the rack has blown out. So we will be working on replacing the steering rack. So I got a new steering rack right here. For those of you who haven't been on this 2007 Honda Civic EX. So we'll go through the steps and get this rack replaced. Alright, so I got the wheels off. I've done a few steering racks in the past, but this is the first time I've done one on a Civic. Everything I'm reading, this whole subframe's got to come off. So look into how we're going to have to pull this guy out. As you can see, there's the leak right there. See if I can get a better angle at it. So you see there's a tear in the boot right there. And what I've read is those O-rings up top and those little Allen keys can leak sometimes. So if you're lucky, it's just that leaking over the boot. But this, obviously, we got a hole in the boot and all the fluid is coming out of the boot. So that shows that that inner seal failed and it's just dumping the fluid inside the boot. I'm going to go ahead and start by pulling the tie rod ends off here. So you got yourself a cotter pin. That'll have to come out first, and then we'll see what size bolt that is and pop that off on each side. Alright, it's a 19 mil nut on the tie rod end. Alright, now we gotta pop this down. I'm going to use a piece of brass and just pop on the top of this stud here, knock it down. There it goes. Make sure whatever you use to hammer this down, you don't damage your threads. So I know a lot of times a lot of people you can hit the side of it as well and it'll pop loose. So you can try that method if you don't have brass. I will do the same thing for the other side. Alright, so we got both tie rod ends undone. Next we want to go ahead and break your tie rod end loose. Unless you purchase new tie rod ends, but we're going to reuse these. They look to be alright. So we want to break these loose while it's still in there so we're not struggling trying to hold the rack while trying to break these nuts loose. So right here is a 19 millimeter. You can get it with a 19 millimeter wrench, and then the nut on the end's a 24 millimeter wrench. So you just want to break this loose. This is a lock nut here. Screw your lock nut back, and then you can unscrew the tie rod end from the outer tie rod end from the inner tie rod. Make sure when you're pulling these apart, that way you're in the ballpark of your alignment. You want to count the revolutions it takes to screw this out of the old rack. That way when you go back with the new rack, you want to screw it the same number of revolutions back in and then snug it down. And that should put you in the ballpark of your alignment. But of course, when you do a steering rack or any type of adjustment with your tie rods, whether replacing a tie rod end or inner tie rod or anything like that, you definitely want to get a alignment done professionally. So we'll go ahead and screw this out on both sides and get these out of the way. Okay, next we're going to come inside here and disconnect the steering shaft from the rack itself. There it goes. Alright, so the bolt we want to undo, you see it, it's that 10mm bolt right there. This comes through right there. There's the head on the other side. So let me go get a ratchet and we'll pop that loose. Make sure your steering wheel's straight before you break that loose, and try not to move it. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and undo the power steering lines to the rack. There's one rubber line there with a screw clamp on it, and the other is a 21mm hard line. So we'll pop those two lines off, let whatever fluid's left in there drain out, and move on to the next step. So let me get these out real quick. Okay, after undoing the line up, I don't know if you can see, but the line I was pointing out earlier, this line's actually attached to the subframe going all the way across to right here. And then this flexible hose looks like it's been replaced before, goes up to the power steering pump. So I actually want to undo it right here, and then I can drop this line with the subframe. And then when we put our new rack in, I can have that line already bolted up and connected to the new rack, and then we'll just have to do this connection. But the other hard line still has to come off, so just wanted to point that out. Okay, so I got the big line, the hard line off, and I also took the line above it off, even though that can wait until the whole rack comes out. So swing around to the other side here. So I'm going to need, like I said, to remove this hose here, and then this hard line going up to where the sensor, the pressure sensor is right here. There is feels like a 10mm, I don't know if you can see it or not, 10mm bolt holding this line down. That should be the only one holding this line, so we want to pull that bracket off that's holding that line down. That way this is free from the rack and from the subframe for when we drop the subframe. So right now I'll go ahead and undo this rubber line here, and then this bracket holding this hard line on. And then that should be ready to go there. Just wanted to show real quick, got this line disconnected, and this hard line is now loose and completely disconnected from the subframe. Okay, now that the rack is basically isolated from the car, we're going to pull everything we need to get the subframe undone and lowered down out of the vehicle. So that's starting, we'll start with this mount here. We'll end up undoing this mount here. These 3 bolts here on the hub on each side. And then we should be good to start pulling our subframe bolts, which are right here in the front on each side, and then there's 2 in the back as well, right in the back here. So with those 4, the whole thing should drop down with the steering rack on it. And then we can slide it out of the way, remove the old steering rack, and put the new steering rack on. Okay, so these are 17mm head up here, and same with the ones on the hub over here. And fortunately, we have enough space we can get in with impact guns, so we're just going to blast these off with the impact gun. Alright, got this mount popped out, so that's loose there, not connected. Got these popped out and out of the way, so these hubs are just floating now on both sides. So now we need to support the subframe, so probably support the back here with a jack. Lift the jack up and then let it slowly down. We'll undo the bolts and let it slowly drop down, and then we can drag it out across the shop. So we'll go ahead and do that, and I'll get more video once it's out. Okay, I got the subframe bolts loosened, but there actually is one more bolt right there that is holding the subframe up. So I have all 4 bolts loosened with the jack under it, but I did not see this bolt. So I'll go ahead and take that bolt out, and then the subframe should be free. Okay, mistake again. There's actually 2 of them. There's 1 on each side. So that's a total of 6 bolts you need to remove to get the subframe out. So I guess these just tie into the top part of the frame there. So I'll pull that one out as well. Okay, the subframe's pulled out. Kind of a pain if you're doing it by yourself. So now we can see the lines I was talking about. And then we got where the rack's bolted up, so we'll have to remove these and these 2 here. Then here's the torn boot where it was leaking. So we'll just pop this off, and I got the new one over here. I'll pop the new one on. Alright, here's our comparison with our old versus new rack. We'll make sure we pull this little plastic guy. That's our line-up pin there. Line center up. And then we also need to remove our rubber mount here and transfer it over to the new one. Then we can go ahead and install it into our subframe. Okay, with it all bolted in, I can go ahead and actually I need to pull this fitting needs to come off as well to go onto the new unit. Alright, pull this plug out of here. We'll go ahead and insert our flare fitting from the old pump onto this one. Okay, and that should fit up just like a brake line. It's got the flare fitting which will seal. Now we can install this hose back on. Tighten that worm clamp down. Now this is our other line that's in there that we left in there. Pop that guy out, that way we can get that put in. Okay, everything's tightened down and should be ready to go back in. Try and lift it up on that jack and maneuver it back up under there. Put it in. Okay, we have everything tight now. Subframe's tight. Our mount right here is tight again. We tighten our ball joint back up, the 3 on each side. Now we have to run that line back in there, snug that up, and then also reattach the little 10mm bracket on the back side. Okay, I got that bracket hooked back up, and don't forget to connect your line, your rubber line over here that we undid as well. So we'll tighten that clamp up as well. Okay, I went ahead and slid our shaft on. Kept the steering wheel straight, slid that on, so that's straight up and down as well, just like how we took it off and the steering wheel straight. Now we can spin it and slide our 10mm bolt in there and tighten that up. Alright, with the bolt tight on the inside, that leaves the only thing left is to hook back up our tie rod ends. So, as you remember, we counted how many rotations it took for them to come off, so we'll want to go back together with that same amount of rotations, and that should put us in the ballpark of our alignment we previously had on the other rack and pinion. But of course, once all that's done, we want to take the car and actually get a legitimate alignment done. So I'll go ahead and spin these back on and hook them up. and then we can fill up our power steering reservoir and bleed the system. And I'll show you how to do that. And once all that's together, we should be done. We'll check for leaks, and that's it. So what you want to do is you want to keep your reservoir full and turn the wheels side to side to run all the air out of the system. So I backed it up onto the pavement out here so I'm not scrubbing the tires on the paint. You can see we got a lot of air bubbles on the power steering reservoir. So we'll just keep working them out. Alright, so it sounds pretty good. Go ahead and put the cap back on our power steering pump. I don't see any leaks. I crawled underneath, I didn't see any leaks, so I'd say we're good to go on that.